Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Erik Onarheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show. Hey, we're doing a deep dive today on our favorite library that we've talked about, but we've waited a little while to do a deeper dive on it because it is kind of selfish. But it's the sponsor of the podcast, Excalibur.js, the friendly TypeScript 2D game engine for the web. And I will be acting as your friendly little interviewer because Erik is the one who maintains it, and he's the creator.
Hey!
Yeah, so I think listeners have kind of heard a little bit of the pitch for Excalibur, but do you want to just start from the beginning? Like, what is Excalibur? What's it good for?
Yeah, so I think it's really catered at those web developers that have always wanted to make a game, and they don't want to be encumbered by Unity or Unreal or even Godot, and they want to use their existing skill set to make a game. And I know for a fact that was kind of my passion when I started out doing this. There wasn't really anything out there when we first started. It had been the start of HTML5. Flash had just had the infamous Jobs memo. So Flash was kind of the name of the game for making interactive content on the web for a good long while. And then TypeScript just fell out of the heavens, to maybe not put it too fine a bow on it, but it looks a lot like ActionScript. So, a lot of folks were like, okay, now we have Canvas, now we have TypeScript, we have something that looks a lot like ActionScript. We can make games pretty easily. And I've always been kind of a 2D game fan, so we just oriented around 2D. So any questions about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, first of all, what is HTML Canvas? So how does, do I write an Excalibur game with HTML and CSS, or how does that work?
Oh, that's a great question. So to answer the first one is HTML Canvas is like a way of doing your own custom drawing. So, for getting HTML elements and CSS, I want to manipulate pixels directly. So that's what Canvas gets you. And we use a specific technology in the HTML Canvas called WebGL, technically WebGL2, which is based on the open graphics library, OpenGL, ES2 spec. And was created mostly for mobile, but it simplifies the spec quite a bit. And it allows us to do really performant things when we're drawing and stuff like that. Now, to answer your second question, do I use HTML and CSS when we're building games? Absolutely. And I'd say where you want to use HTML and CSS is for UI, because you know what? The web kind of solved that problem the best. So I think trying to draw your own buttons and stuff, while you can do that, and that's totally okay. I'd say I would lean towards HTML and CSS because they come with a lot of built-in stuff that you want out of the box, like accessibility, scaling, styling. Otherwise, you have to re-implement all of that stuff yourself, and that's maybe a waste of time. Unless you're going for something extremely specific, and then go draw your own pixels.
Okay, so just to set the scene here, to draw a metaphor for something that I'm very familiar with, and maybe the listeners are too, Super Mario. If I want to make a Super Mario game, I'm not writing the Mario character, the Mario sprite guy, or the platforms in HTML, am I?
No.
Okay.
No, that would be an Excalibur code.
Okay.
And
that's TypeScript.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, everything is in TypeScript. It's very similar to Unity or Godot programming, if you're familiar with that kind of way of doing things, very object-oriented API, where you have in Unity, for example, you have a game object, and it has various components attached to it, various life cycles attached to it, and you override those in C#. Very similar flow in Godot and in Excalibur. That's kind of the preferred way to do it. In Excalibur, you would extend, Like if you want to make Mario, you do class Mario extends actor, and then you would fill in your life cycle information, like your on initialize, your on post update, your graphics, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so let's go back to what is an actor then? If I'm extending x.actor, but what is an actor?
Yeah, good question. So Excalibur tries to do things like a theater metaphor.
Okay.
So, for example, everything is organized into scenes. You don't have to use scenes. Everything comes with one scene by default. So I've seen games that are all just crammed into one scene.
Okay.
Totally fine. And especially depending on the game that you're making, might be totally reasonable to do. It's just a convenient way of grouping like things together that might resemble a level.
Okay, gotcha. So like my main menu might be a scene, but then when it transitions into like the level, that's a different scene. Or like, yeah, so like if I have the overworld where I'm doing my level select, that's one scene, and then I tap or click on a level to go into, it like transitions into like the next scene. I could set I could set it up that way.
Yeah, and then to answer your original question, what are actors? Well, it's anything that moves around and is drawn on the screen.
Okay.
Kind of like, in the theater, when there's a certain scene, you see actors running around on the stage, saying things, doing things. Same idea.
Okay, cool. What other kinds of stuff is there in Excalibur? Like, what can I do with it? And I mean, we could continue with the like Super Mario platformer, but like, you want to give some examples of like what else can I do with Excalibur?
Yeah, I'd say you can make any kind of 2D game relatively easily.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of features. If we wanted to dip our toe into that, the biggest feature, and I count this as a feature, we have a lot of documentation, which I think is the number one most important thing to have. And then we have a lot of examples of how to build specific games. So like in this example, we were talking about like platformer. We have a really high fidelity platformer sample on how to build a platformer. We also have high fidelity samples of how to build like a Flappy Bird type game.
Mm-hmm.
We also have really high fidelity samples of like puzzlers. In fact, most of our most successful games are puzzlers.
Uh-huh.
So you can really build anything that you can imagine like in a 2D game. And I think we have most of those things figured out. I even have a turn-based thing figured out. So like if you're like, oh, I want to be like a turn-based tactical RPG, those are like one of my favorite things on earth. So we have one of those too.
Nice. And what about like physics games? Can I make a game where things like I can push stuff around like a cut the rope type of deal?
You could totally do that. The Excalibur physics system comes with 2 different solvers built in, and solver just means resolving collisions.
Okay.
So for most games, like 99% of the time, we have a solver called Arcade, which is not based in reality. So like think Mario, think Zelda, where you're like top down. Its goal is to keep you from overlapping with other geometry. And then for like realistic games like Cut the Rope, we have a realistic physics solver. And this is like if you were doing like Angry Birds type games and you wanted things to like bounce off each other and like roll around. So we have a realistic physics solver. Now, specifically for ropes, those require a little more effort than is built into Excalibur by default. So if you wanted to do Cut the Rope, you have to do a little more effort, but we have done it. You can also sub in, like if you're like, you know what, the built-in physics system in Excalibur is not working out for me. You can also sub in your own.
Okay.
And we have an example of how to do that.
So I could bring in my own physics engine. Would that be like Box 2D or something?
Totally. Yeah, Box2D, Matter.js. There's another one that I'm forgetting of. But those type of things we can sub in. And it's specifically because of the way Excalibur is built, is all the behaviors are organized into systems. So you can say, we're going to eject this built-in Excalibur system and bring in our own collision system.
Okay. That's cool. So we've got arcade and realistic physics built in. What about like input? So obviously I would assume mouse and keyboard, but what other kind of inputs do you guys support?
Yeah, we support, in addition to mouse and keyboard, gamepad input.
Oh.
Did you know that HTML5 has a gamepad input API?
Well, I did, but maybe our listeners don't. That's a surprise.
Well, there totally is. So we have a couple features to make that a little easier, because random USB peripherals also sometimes identify as a gamepad, but they're not really. They're like a gamepad with two buttons, which doesn't really count in my opinion. So you can also specify like, hey, I want you to detect gamepads that are plugged in, but I want the gamepads to meet a minimum bar, this many buttons, and maybe like a joystick or something. So you can ask Excalibur to only give you gamepads that meet like a certain bar.
Cool. Okay, so I could plug in my Xbox controller and it should, quote unquote, just work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now it is relying on the, whatever drivers are on the system to interact with, the browser like Chrome.
Okay.
Because it kind of goes through the browser API path. So as long as it works on your machine, it should work in the browser.
Okay. As far as assets go, first, do you want to maybe define for people what are the common assets that you would use in a game, and then what does Excalibur do out of the box for that?
Yeah. So I'd say like the most common is probably art, like images.
Okay.
So typically you'll load either a PNG or an SVG, and we support both of those. You can load any image that is supported by the web, but typically you'll be doing something that is lossless for a game, and we'll load those over the network with a loader, so that you can, you have to wait until your assets are loaded and like pulled into the GPU before you can use them.
Okay.
So we'll do that. The other type is audio. So similar story, you might have something lossy or lossless. We support anything that the browser supports. Once that is pulled in, we use the web audio API to decode and get that ready and prompted for you to play, so you don't have to know how to use like the web audio API.
Yeah, that's cool, because when I first started with Excalibur, I've been doing HTML development for a long time, so I knew that there was an audio tag, but the web audio API is different. Do you want to explain like how that works a little bit?
Yeah, and for a long time we had, before the web audio API was well supported, we had an audio tag implementation, which would create audio tags behind the scenes and wire them up to loaded audio that was loaded and decoded. And then it had a ring buffer of tags that would just like play, and then it would loop around and keep playing, so that, you could do that. And so the web audio API in particular is kind of like a graph-based API where you wire up audio sources and different effects in a audio chain from the source, which is like the source audio clip, to the destination, which is the speakers.
Okay.
Or it can be the speakers. Typically it's the speakers. But you can do all kinds of like wild effects, including like building like an equalizer, building like panner nodes, building like 3D audio, all of that stuff. Excalibur right now is pretty simple. You control volume through a gain node, and that's about it.
Okay, but that's cool. So it's extendable. So like I could transform my sound through like some sort of audio node before it gets output to the speakers. So like that would open you up to like, if I want to create like those classic retro beeps and boops, like do we have something for that?
Yeah, actually we have plugins that support, there's a like really popular tool in the game dev world called JF or Sound Effectser, SFXR, and then there's a JavaScript implementation of it called JS SFXR, which is really a mouthful to say. But the advantage there is it's all procedurally like defined sound. So like there's like I think a dozen and a half parameters to make like classic beeps and boops that you might have heard in like Nintendo games.
Yep.
And one advantage is you don't need to download a binary audio format. You're downloading like the parameters to play the sounds in the web audio API.
Okay,
and so we have a plugin for that.
So
and
that would be like much more efficient, right? Than I'm not.
Oh, totally.
I'm not having to upload, an audio like an MP3 file or something like that. It actually can just be serialized to a format, and then the plugin just reads from it.
Yeah, you can kind of think of it like in a similar vein to like MIDI, where MIDI isn't an audio file, it's instructions on how to play the audio.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. And what about going back to like graphics? Like if I'm a game dev noob, I have no idea. Like how do I get a graphic into the engine? Like do I make a PNG file? Or like are there other ways? Like what if I want to make a map? You know what I mean? Like either like a Super Mario level that's like I can see it side to side, like side scroller, or like a Zelda top down. Are there like that seems like it would be a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are some really popular tools out there right now that we support first party, which is Tiled. The Tiled map editor is TILED, and it's kind of the battleship. And it can support like every type of game map format that you're thinking of. Like you want hexagons, you want isometric, or you want plain old 2D. It'll support all of those things. So we support loading those. So that's might be where you do your level design, as you might do it in Tiled.
Okay.
And another thing that we support is LDTK, short for Level Design Toolkit. It's the same. It's made by the same person that made Dead Cells. I'd say that this one is my preferred editor, but it only supports 2D maps, so you won't be able to do isometric or hexagons.
Okay.
But that's pretty rare for me, honestly. So you could go ahead.
So basically, I can design my levels using a tool like Tiled or you said LDTK is another one. And then what do I do then? Do I just like export it and then Excalibur reads it in, or like how does that work?
Yeah. We try to make it as easy as possible. So you just save the map in the default map format in these editors.
Cool.
So there's no need to run like a fancy pants export. And then Excalibur's plugins for these, like you might have the LDTK plugin, the Tiled plugin, you could just point it at this map format. It'll just suck it all in. It'll hoover it all in. And a lot of these map formats also reference their own graphics and stuff like that. Excalibur knows how to like parse all that and like throw them up into the game.
Okay, so now you've got my web dev gears turning. Does that mean that I can do hot reload then? Like if I save my level, will it just automatically load up in Excalibur? Like I don't have to rebuild it or something? How does that work?
It will reload if you're using something like Vite or Parcel, but it'll start you from the beginning.
Okay.
So I was actually having this conversation literally yesterday with someone. Part of the problem, if you want to do hot reload in like a game, is you need to have a state serialization strategy.
Okay.
That is important for your game.
Yeah.
So like, how many items have I collected? How many things have I done in my game? How far have I progressed in my game? Without having that, it's hard to rehydrate where you are automatically.
Yes.
So that's a thing we're talking about as like implementing. We do have a experimental plugin, Vite plugin, built by a community member that can restart you from the current scene you're on.
Okay.
But that's about as best we can do without like a game state serialization strategy.
Oh.
That is in the works though.
Okay, so just to back up here and be clear, when you are building a game, there is state that you have to keep track of. Now, if I understand you correctly, Excalibur doesn't come baked in with like a state library or like a state manager. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
So right now, you got to roll it yourself. Now, personally, I've played with Xstate as like a state manager. We've also just rolled it ourselves. Like you can make, public or private class fields, and like that can be your state. But there's not a formal way to like serialize and deserialize right now. But what you're saying is that once that becomes first party, then that'll open the door to being like, oh yeah, we have a basic HMR implementation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
And the HMR right now is like, you can make a change and you reload from the beginning. And a lot of times what we wind up doing is like we just hack in to start at the level that we need to start at. And so it's not the worst, but it's, it's definitely an area that we're looking to improve in.
Sweet. Okay. Are there any other features you want to mention that you think are cool for people?
Yeah. So, we talked a little bit about loading. One of the things that you want to do is you don't want to load everything up front. Now, certainly you can, but your people might be waiting a long time to play your game. So you can also load things on a per scene basis or even completely out of band if you want. And you can pop a loading screen or not. So these are all like options that are available to you. We also allow you to do scene transitions. So when you're moving between scenes, you can have a transition that hides a load. So you can do things like that where you don't show a loading screen. You just have a transition that's hiding a load, things like that. So you have a lot of options in asset loading. And it's important to spread that load out depending on your game. I mean, if it's a small game, you can load it all up front, and that's fine. And it depends on the experience that you want to have. If you want like a no load situation, you could base 64 a whole bunch of stuff and embed it in the browser so that it's parsed and loaded and ready to go. Like you can do tricks like that. Some other things that I want to talk about is, we try to be the best default possible, like the best sane default possible. So a lot of that comes with, pre-configuring the collision systems, pre-configuring the renderers so that things are fast by default. In fact, you have to try really, really hard to do something bad for it to not be performant. So we do a thing called batch rendering, which in the business means we queue up all of these draw calls and submit them to the GPU, and it's one draw call. So like you might have thousands of things on the screen at once, but it's one GPU draw.
Okay.
Which is super fast.
Yeah.
In fact, you have to try really hard not to do that. Not to have it be batch rendered by default.
Nice. So how many things can I put on the screen?
You can put a lot. It depends on your computer, but I wish I had a benchmark pulled up, and it's more than you should need. Like I have someone that made a survivor's like, so that works just fine.
Oh, do you mean like a Vampire Survivors type of deal? Where like
yeah, that's correct.
All these enemies are coming at you. Okay.
Yeah. It's quite a bit. The bottleneck becomes like processing like all of those entities, not the drawing. Okay. Like the drawing you can do insane amount of drawing. The bottleneck starts becoming is like, okay, how do you what's the logic for all of these entities? That's when things start to slow down.
Okay, so that's more like just pure JavaScript performance engineering at that point, right?
You got it. Cool. Another cool thing you can do that was asked for a long time ago and is recent in the last year is you can do custom shaders on a per actor basis. So what is a shader? I have a talk about it, but it's a program that you can run on the GPU to do whatever you want to do with pixels. So you can do really wild stuff with shaders. Like you can do like flash animations, so like when they get hit, or you can do warping, you can do color swapping, you can do lots of stuff.
What's the advantage of doing that versus like just writing that all in my JavaScript code?
So one advantage is shaders run on the GPU.
Okay.
So especially for a thing like where you're looping through pixels, the GPU is super, super good at running those in parallel because the GPUs are organized into parallel compute units. You can kind of think about it as, this is not quite true, but for all intents and purposes, it is true, is they run these programs on every pixel at once. Versus like if you were to write this on the CPU, you'd have to iterate through each pixel individually. Oh. And that would be much slower. Okay. So like if you wanted to apply this effect, you certainly could. Like there are plenty of effects if you're doing like a pixel art type thing where that might be doable on the CPU. And JavaScript is single threaded. Asterisk, that's not quite true, but mostly it's true. Mm-hmm. That's pretty slow.
Yeah. Okay, so I can write these shaders in TypeScript.
No.
Oh.
No, you can't.
I can't. How come?
No. So this is a good question, and it's mostly because shader languages are the worst. Oh. But so you write these shaders in a language called GLSL. Now, there are attempts to make different like abstractions over GLSL such that you can like write them in TypeScript. So I think there's a language called TSL, which is very much a work in progress.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That will let you write 3JS shaders, which are not quite compatible with Excalibur shaders. Okay. They have different assumptions and stuff. But that idea where you can write it in TypeScript and if it compiles, it'll output a GLSL shader. It kind of breaks the abstraction because it's not JavaScript. It's outputting a different C type language.
Yeah.
That you also can't debug.
Okay. So while it might be nice as a TypeScript developer to be able to write shaders in TypeScript, that still is sort of like saying it's nice to have an ORM over your SQL, but you still have to debug the SQL, right? And so you still have to debug the shader, which means you still have to be familiar with the shader programming language. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're probably better off learning GLSL.
Okay.
In that case, versus like trying to apply an abstraction over it, and then, perhaps, being lost in the abstraction.
Sure. I guess there might be a bonus here too, where can you like share shaders between games, or like can people post their shaders and you can like kind of copy paste them and customize them?
Oh yeah, totally. So shaders are very portable. There's, in fact, a very popular website called Shader Toy. I think it's shadertoy.com. But people share shaders that they write, and it's pretty amazing what people do. It's all drawing with math. It's pretty wild. So oftentimes people will go and look for a thing on Shader Toy and adapt it for their game, or post something that they did and post it up. So yeah, it's pretty portable. There's one that I've used quite a bit, is I have an outline shader up on the documentation website to draw like a pixel border around your sprites, so that you don't have to go into your sprite sheet and redraw all of your sprites for every animation that you have, but also have an outline.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do we want to sort of go back to the beginning of, like, first of all, why did you start Excalibur? And then related, how was it built in TypeScript? Like, how was it as you were building in TypeScript? Because it was sort of brand new at that time, right?
Yeah, this is kind of a funny story. Like, I was voluntold by my manager at the time, Jim, who might listen to this episode, but Jim was like, hey, you should give a presentation about TypeScript, because it had just came out at Build 2007? I don't know.
I think it was like
maybe
2011 or something.
Oh, no, I think you're right. It's 2011. You're 100% right. It rhymed with 7. Anyway, so it had just come out, and you're like, oh, we're doing a lot of work at General Mills at the time with huge JavaScript code bases, like gigantic JavaScript code bases. And a lot of that was running on, like, at the time, Cordova. We're doing hybrid apps inside of Cordova for the iPads and stuff like that. And it was really challenging. Like, a lot of the pain points that we had at that time were solved by TypeScript. Like, you have multiple people working on a team. You want to be able to discover code that already exists. You want to reuse code. You want to know if you're not typoing anything, because if it crashes on an iPad, the only way to know if you messed up is to have it hooked up to a MacBook Pro with Xcode running, so that you can see the browser log out of the WebKit view.
Yeah.
Which is not great, So TypeScript really was kind of like, oh, this is great. Like, we were immediately excited. So I was tasked with like, oh, let's go figure this out and go do something. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to make a presentation. What's a thing that I like? Well, I like video games. So let me make a little game out of like a TypeScript thing using HTML canvas. At the time I was just doing 2D canvas, so no WebGL. So just very, very lo-fi canvas API and TypeScript. And that was the first version of Excalibur. Like that, it was originally called Game TS, which is a terrible name, but that was the first version for that presentation.
I feel like that would be a fun engine name, though. It's like, what do you work on? I work on Game.ts. It's the TypeScript game engine.
It's Game TS. Yeah, I have a feeling that the SEO juice on that one would be tough.
Yeah, I think so. I like Excalibur personally.
Yeah.
Why'd you call it Excalibur? I want to know.
Well, I kind of am a huge, like, Arthurian myth nerd, and I love that stuff. Like, Sam Neill was my favorite actor because he played Merlin in that TV special. I don't know. I always liked, like, King Arthur stuff, so that was part of the reason why. Not a real strong tie to, like, TypeScript or video, well, maybe a little bit of games, because it's, like, kind of mystical.
Yeah,
but
I think I talked to you about this one time before, and I said, actually, it fits really well because you are empowering web developers to make games. So when Arthur, he's just a kid, and he pulls out Excalibur and he becomes the king, it's like you're giving people this power to make games. Like,
I love that. We'll just say that I said that.
Yep. That's funny.
That's great.
Okay.
And then I think the other reason I wanted to do it, like because I looked out there when I started doing it, and there was nothing to make games on the web. And if there were things, it was all paid or behind a paywall. And, this is not necessarily the case now. There's a lot of free tools out there and, more power to them. And I was like, you know what? I want to make something open source and free so that people can make games. And I just, I have a lot of knowledge about how to build games, and let's just make it open source.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that when I started working on Excalibur in the early days, I did not have a game dev background. I didn't even have a computer science background. And there are a lot of concepts in game dev that are like math oriented or like data structure oriented. And I found that it was actually easier than I thought to like build games. And you just have to know a few of the basic foundational structures. And so when we worked on those early docs, it was mostly like me writing them just to understand how to build games in the first place. So like, and that we've tried to keep that culture going. Like we want Excalibur to be friendly to people who have never made games before. Like if it's your first time making a game, we want it to be approachable. And it's not to say that it's going to be easy to like build a game, because building games is very hard, but it also shouldn't be complex. So like we've tried to make the API simple, if that makes sense. And I think that brings us to the next section. How do people get started? What is the best way for them to get the most out of Excalibur and check it out?
Yeah, and we've put a lot of effort into this recently, but I would definitely go to Excalibur.js.com and check out the Flappy Bird example. We go, turn by turn, page by page, and I think it's like 14 or 15 steps to build Flappy Bird, and we're trying to introduce concepts one at a time, so you're not like in the deep end immediately, like empty editor syndrome. We'll just go one at a time and explain, okay, this is what this is doing for you, and this is what this is doing for you. And I'd like to think it makes sense, but I can't see clearly because I know it like the back of my hand, but I've heard good things.
There's a saying, you can't read the label from the inside of the bottle, right?
Yeah, that's such a great one.
Yeah, so we kind of need, and that, I think what's great is we've got a growing community on Discord, and these are all folks that are building games actively and also are like helping each other. So like if you come into the community and you're like, I don't even know where to start. How do I do this thing? You can just hop into the Discord and ask, and people will chime in. And we see a lot of people sharing code snippets or suggestions. Like there was so much cool stuff when we were at the event this like past couple weeks. You had a community reel that was 20 minutes long of just like stuff that people are building. And there was really cool stuff that I had never seen before. Like someone is working on like a dialogue system, like if you have an RPG, and I've always wanted like a Paper Mario style dialogue system where you can do text effects, and someone's actually doing that. And people are making really cool games with it. And these are not just like toy games. Some of them are published games, right?
Yeah, there are two that I know of that are going to Steam sometime soon that aren't from me.
So once you build your game, obviously you can distribute it on the web, but like where else can your game go?
Yeah, and to harken back to Steam, roughly speaking, if you're a web developer, did you know you can already publish to Steam? And in fact, a friend of the show, Drew Conley, has 2 games on Steam that are made in React, and you would never know. The secret technique there is you wrap it in Electron, and you can distribute it through Steam.
Nice.
And there's a little bit of like shenanigans you got to do to interact with the Steam API, but it's not too bad. So same goes for Excalibur. So, you can publish to Steam, no strings attached. Again, everything, there's no paywall between you and making games. So you can, go to mobile right now. You can go to Steam, totally free. The trick is Electron, or now Tauri as well, for going to like PC platforms, desktop platforms, or using like a thing like Capacitor, which is kind of the successor to Cordova in the mobile world.
Yeah, and that's from Ionic. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so like you wouldn't necessarily do like a React Native app, although maybe you could because if there's a web view, like as long as there's a web view, you can do it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly how these technologies are working. And React Native kind of does something different. React Native runs enough of a browser. Like they re-implemented just enough of JavaScript to run React.
Okay,
So
so it's probably not what we would recommend. Although I guess you could try it, but I think the easiest method to go to mobile would be a capacitor like wrapper, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
And we have examples of doing both of those things.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to like say, oh, how do I get bootstrapped with that? I got you covered, friend.
Nice.
I have samples for you
Very nice.
on how to do that.
Well, I think one question people might have is like, is this for me? Like, when should I use Excalibur? When should I maybe look at something else? Like you mentioned already, there's Godot, there's Unity. What else could people build games in?
Yeah. Yeah. To be fully transparent, there's a ton of competition in the web space. I think the incumbent is definitely Phaser, but certainly you can use Godot and Unity to build web games. They have like a WebAssembly build. There's some, strings attached with those. But, if you're like a C# person or you really want like the full editor experience, Unity with WebAssembly might be a place to go. GameMaker and a few of those other tools also have similar WebAssembly exports. So those are all like options. Phaser has been around for a good long while, almost as long as we have. They've been doing it for a while as well. So there's a lot of content out there about Phaser. So that might be another thing to look at. Their API is just structured very differently than our own. So I'd say just try them both out and see what makes you happy. So, Phaser does things a certain way and we do things a very different way, and whatever floats your boat.
Cool.
Use whatever makes you happy.
Yeah, that's nice. So you can kind of choose like based on maybe your experience level and maybe also the like level of community integration you need. Like I think one thing that's really nice about Unity is they've got the asset store, right? So there's all sorts of assets and all sorts of stuff. But at the same time, it's also a lot more complex to build games with Unity. But with what we're trying to do with Excalibur is to try to make it approachable so that you don't have to learn new skills. Like you have to learn new game development, like knowledge and skills, but you don't have to learn new technical skills to build games.
That's right.
Cool. What would your takeaway advice be if I'm in the audience and I kind of want to make my first game? Like, how should I even get started?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I've been asked this a few times as a person that is on the board of an indie game development association. I think the best advice is to make lots of little stuff.
Okay.
There's a pottery metaphor that I forget the attribution, but if you make lots and lots of pots, every day you make a new pot, you're going to be really good at making pots versus like if you spend an entire year making one pot. So I think that applies to game development. Make lots of little games before you make your magnum opus. Because if you start making your MMO, you will be doing that for a very long time.
Yep.
And maybe it's good, maybe it isn't. But if you make lots of little things, you can make lots of little mistakes and learn a lot quicker. Great tools to do that are a thing called a game jam, where, for a weekend, a week, a month, you devote yourself to making a game. There's Ludum Dare, there's JS13K, there's the GitHub Game Jam, there's the Dev2 Game Jam, there's the Game Dev JS Jam, which I think is wrapping up soon or just did. There's so many jams out there. Itch.io has a lot of, jam integration built in, so you can really take that and run. The idea is to give yourself some creative constraints and give yourself a time box to make a game. And you learn a lot doing that.
Yeah, and you can do that by yourself, or we've always done it on a team. And if you're like, well, I'm not sure who I could ask to like be on my team, well, you could come into the Discord to start with to see if there's anybody available. But then I think you'll still learn a ton if you just do it by yourself too.
That's right.
Yeah. And we've done Ludum Dare game jams, which are usually 3-day events, like 72 hours, right?
Yeah.
And we've done them both. We started out kind of pre-COVID. We always would do it in person. And then our families started to build out a little bit more and we got a little bit busy. So now we've just been doing them remotely or virtually over Trello and stuff. And that's worked out really well.
Yeah, we're on Discord and we project manage with Trello, and we make a game in 72 hours.
Yep.
And it's pretty amazing what comes out of that super unsustainable pace. You can sustain it for 72 hours.
Yep.
At least in our case.
And actually, our advice since starting this has been don't like work overnight, or, like actually get some sleep because you'll actually perform much better in the morning.
Yeah, the law of diminishing returns on sleeplessness is real. Just the quality of stuff you put out is so low when you're tired.
Yep, and you'll often find that you can fix bugs or remember how to do something when you wake up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Yeah, where do you want to end? Like, what does the future look like for Excalibur? Because right now we're pre 1.0, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And that might scare a few people off, but remember, we've been doing this for more than a decade. And right now, the API won't be changing very much between now and V1. V1 is happening in 2025. And we have some things planned for like celebrating that. And all that's going to say is we're going to start doing Semver. So we'll start doing Semver at V1. The API is going to be very similar to what it is right now. So like, don't feel put off by version 0.30. It's going to be roughly the same. The only things that are changing are some light refactoring internal to users, so that should be a completely transparent change. You shouldn't notice that at all. And then a few additional features that we want to add before V1, namely accessibility is like the big one, where we want to have ways of communicating to not fully abled folks and using games as like either permanently disabled or, temporarily disabled. So there's a few things that we want to add in there around input as well to make, to round out a V1.
Yeah, this is stuff that we've run into previously. First, like when you have colorblind users, you need to make sure that you have ways to address that. So I think Excalibur has some built-in controls for that. And then input mapping is a really big one. Like all of our Game Jam games, I think historically have always just had fixed inputs. Like you could only press the certain keys that do things. You can't like change that mapping, because imagine trying to build that UI and those dialogue and that state management yourself. It's kind of a big task. So we never had that ability to do it during a game jam. But I think your plan is to make that native into Excalibur, where there's like an input mapper.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to have the like pit of success here, so that like every game made with Excalibur is just accessible or has a baseline of accessibility.
Cool.
And that, having an input screen that just ships with things, and then you can customize it with whatever like your themes are in your game, and then, give us a font, give us a theme, and it'll just spit out a UI that's passable by default. Of course, you could customize it to your heart's content, but just having that, just lowering that barrier so that folks can just interact with the game right out of the box and use whatever tools they need to use to play the game.
Wonderful.
And then a few other things that we're looking at on top of that is we're working on a visual editor, kind of like Godot or Game Maker. So there'll be an Excalibur Studio coming sometime. It might not come this year, but that's on our radar. So we have some internal prototypes that we've got kicking around. And then the last thing that we're working on is tech to go to consoles. So, we can go everywhere but consoles right now, but we have some promising prototypes. So that's going to be the paid aspect of it, is publishing to consoles.
So I could take my game and put it on Nintendo Switch.
That's the idea.
Nice. Oh, and just to talk just a tiny little bit about the studio. So right now, to build an Excalibur game, it's all code, right? It's a full code experience, which is a really
unless you're using like tiled or LDTK.
Right, yeah. But you have to write all the game logic in code yourself right now. And I think to sort of bring some of that experience of like built-in tooling to like make it easier to build these like common types of games, we want some visual builder, like some way to like kind of get that hot reload experience, but like in the studio. So like I can tweak my game and I still get access to the code, but some of it, there's still a lot of boilerplate stuff. Like you're placing entities onto the screen, or you want to maybe even be able to like draw interactively to build your maps. We have people in the Discord who have built custom visual editors for their, specifically just for their game, to be able to like edit their maps. But I think we kind of want that kind of experience so that there is like a visual experience to building a game.
Totally.
Cool.
Yeah.
And is that going to be paid or is that going to be free, Erik?
Oh yeah, that's going to be free. Yeah.
Free.
So, yep. So everything is going to be free and open source except for going to consoles. And that's kind of necessitated by the fact that consoles are all super secretive. So there's NDAs involved with Nintendo, with Microsoft, with Sony, and all of their development kits are proprietary. So it forces any code that we make to also be proprietary. And our thinking around this is like, okay, well, we'll make money at the very end of the value chain and then not put a barrier in front of game development.
Yeah.
So,
yep. Yeah, I mean, if our strategy is to make, is to bring game dev to web dev, then it would be sort of working against the strategy to have any kind of paywall between, writing your code and getting it into the hands of players, right? So I think the monetizing console porting makes a lot of sense, but there's also lots of other stuff we could experiment with, and we haven't like fully figured it all out yet. But like a lot of these engines kind of sometimes do consulting or custom projects, or they have a support model where you can pay for support. Because right now, I mean, you are in the Discord and you're answering people's questions, but it doesn't quite scale.
Yeah. And, certainly there's plenty of free support on the Discord. And I'd say if you're a studio or a company that needs more dedicated support, we already offer that. So you can get dedicated support with SLAs and all of that. You need that kind of thing. Certainly the Discord is like we do our best, but if you need paid support, you can do that right now. If you need custom development, you can do that right now. We do offer that.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing everything about Excalibur. I hope people go check it out. And this is the point where I'm going to play the mid-roll, so you'll actually hear the ad again. You should pay attention this time and go check it out. TypeScript FM is sponsored by Excalibur.js, the friendly TypeScript game engine for the web. Like many of you, I got into computers because I loved video games and dreamed of making one, but game development always felt a bit intimidating. Instead, I built a career in web development, though that dream of making games never really went away. Then I met Erik, who showed me I could use my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript skills to create games with just a bit of game design knowledge and the right engine. Excalibur.js makes game development approachable, offering everything you need to build 2D web games. Arcade physics, sprites, animations, input support, and integrations with tools like Tiled and Sprite. It's beginner-friendly, yet flexible enough to grow with you. Our team has published 10 games using Excalibur, all written in TypeScript. If you're a web developer looking to dip your toes into game dev or sharpen your TypeScript skills, give Excalibur.js a try at Excalibur.js.com. Click the big tutorial button to start building your first game, Excalibur, a Flappy Bird clone. After that, join our friendly Discord community of web developers who love to help each other and share game dev tips. Okay, just to close out the episode, you must have done a lot of stuff with TypeScript while building this engine. So I'm sure you have tons of secrets of the handbook, but for today's segment, do you want to share a cool secret of the handbook that you think people might be interested in?
Yeah. So, something that I think plagues a lot of like TypeScript developers is like, should I use an interface or should I use a type?
Yes.
The
Yes.
interface keyword versus the type keyword.
What's the difference?
And there isn't a whole lot of difference, except for one really, really notable one that I care about right now, and that's declaration merging.
Okay.
So interfaces support declaration merging with same named interfaces. This is super useful, especially like if you're extending like the global interface or a built-in type, those kind of things. Now, what's really cool is like for Excalibur, we have strongly typed event emitters that use, like roughly speaking, constant objects to strongly type, an event name to the type of object that comes out of the event or out of the event handler. So what you can do as a user of Excalibur is you can take advantage of declaration merging if you want to extend that. You can say, oh, I'm going to declare that the built-in actor events, there's actually more that exist.
Cool.
And you can do declaration merging to do that. And that's not just for Excalibur, but you can do that for other libraries as well. If they have interfaces, you can go ahead and extend those interfaces and say like, oh, there's other things that exist on this type. Versus like, if I just did like the type keyword, it's more restrictive, even if you're doing like type intersection to try and like build up a type, it's a little more restrictive versus like, tossing up new things onto an interface with the same name.
People might be familiar with this if they've had to extend some of the global types like on the window object, right? Because if you bring in a new, let's say, for simplicity's sake, you bring in jQuery, it's going to expose the $ onto the window object. Now, if you didn't bring in the jQuery types and you go take a look at them, what they actually do is they redeclare like the window interface, which is built in, and then they add the $ declaration, and it just gets merged with the lib DOM types or whatever they are. So that's one way. That's like kind of what we're talking about when we're saying declaration merging. And you can do that with other libraries too, as long as they are defining stuff on interfaces and not types, right?
That's right. Yeah, and it's pretty slick. And it's a thing that, you might not think to reach for, but I just want to remind you that that is a thing you can do, and it's super useful.
Wonderful. All right. That's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to TypeScript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at comronicus.com, and Erik is at erikonarheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at typescript.fm.